Good evening and welcome to this special live version of John Birch Society Roundup here on Somerville Community Access Television. Tonight we've actually gone out and captured from his home in Lexington Noam Chomsky, and we're holding him hostage until he recants everything that he's said over the past 30 years. I'm Barry Crimmins, and it's a pleasure to be here. Actually, this is Dead Air Live. I just know that I live in Somerville and I get to watch the excellent John Birch Society program, and you should too, because it is information that we all need to know other people believe. It's a pleasure to be here with Dr. Chomsky, a man who actually writes faster than I can read. I have your stuff delivered to my house each day. We're discussing tonight the first 100 days of the Clinton administration and change, which was the theme of the campaign. People on the street interviews talked about healthcare and jobs and change. What kind of change do you think?
Well, it's true. The Clinton administration, the Clinton campaign, focused on the magic word change, and the Clinton, one of their main documents that the campaign put out was in fact entitled Mandate for Change, and things were really going to be new. They didn't tell you that the phrase mandate for change is one that they borrowed, actually. It had been invented by Dwight Eisenhower's PR people.
Well, they were so innovative.
Yeah, and in fact, that tells you about how much change you can expect. The same kind of mandate for change that Eisenhower had is the kind of mandate for change that the Clinton people have. Now, there is a mandate for change. There's no doubt about that. The general population has been moving almost off the spectrum of policy choices. However, it's not too well known, but right through the 1980s, the same was true. So if you looked at public opinion studies through the 80s, the population was strongly opposed to almost all the major Reagan policies. Right through the 80s, the general population was drifting towards a kind of New Deal style social welfare type system. I mean, the population was, when people were asked, would you like to have social spending or military spending, it was social spending by a huge margin. Education, welfare, health, and so on and so forth. And there has been that mandate for change all along, and there still is. And if you look at popular attitudes on major issues, there's pretty clear attitudes on things like health and jobs and trade issues and industrial policy and so on. However, if you compare those attitudes with the policy choices, the range of policy choices around, they're very remote from one another. So the mandate for change is there, but the change is not very likely to come.
Well, just the health care, for example, did they matter-of-factly throw out the Canadian form of health care as even a possibility?
Yeah, that's an interesting case. I mean, that's one of the interesting cases. I mean, the business community is almost entirely opposed to what we call a Canadian-style program, a single-payer program.
That's all you need to know with Clinton.
That essentially ends. That means the press is almost 100% opposed to it. If you look at press commentary, it's almost unanimous in support of what they call managed competition. Now, occasionally they even tell you why. So, for example, the New York Times had in one of their many long studies of this, they had a very upbeat, big front page story, running onto an inside page about the marvels of managed competition using California as a model, and it's a bureaucratic nightmare with layer after layer of bureaucracy and administration and complexity and so on. Toward the end, they asked some health industry executive, what about the possibility of a single payer plan? And he said, well, that's not politically possible. And the reason is because it offers nothing to the insurance companies.
Right.
Which is exactly right, offers nothing to the insurance companies. Now, what about popular attitude? Well, it depends. You have to be careful in interpreting answers to questions, but a considerable majority of the population has been consistently in favor of a single-payer program. They can look across the border and see what happens.
Right.
The last poll I saw just a couple of days ago was Baird in the New York Times, was about 60% in favor. But it's not an option. And it will not be an option until people clamor enough and make enough pressure so as to put on the political agenda the things that they want. In this case, the population has been pretty well stilled. The program that will be initiated, we sort of see the contours of it, will in fact leave plenty of room for the insurance companies, and it will still be a bureaucratic nightmare. The U.S. system, as compared with, say, Canada or England or continental Europe and so on, spends an enormous amount on just administrative costs. And that doesn't, when they make those calculations, maybe 5 times as much or 10 times as much, not small numbers. Right. When they make those calculations, they don't even count in the major cost.
Right.
They only talk about the cost of doctors. How about the cost of the person who has to fill out those forms?
Right.
It's a nightmare. And it'll probably continue that way. Well, there's a case where there's a mandate for change, but unless there's a lot of popular pressure, the change isn't going to come.
Well, I think it was telling that it seemed like Clinton was telling us during the campaign that we need to run this country more like a corporation, and I sort of think it already is run an awful lot like an awful lot of corporations.
Well, it is in one striking respect, namely the people who run it are from corporations,
right,
or from corporate law firms, or from investment firms, and so on, and their basic concern, not surprisingly, is the interests of investors.
Right.
And in fact, that's something that goes back to the origins of the Republic.
And not the interest of the people that actually have to go out there and be wage slaves.
The general public is supposed to be, there's a theory about this. The general public is supposed to be passive. They're supposed to be spectators, not participants. The participants are the people who have what they call the national interest at heart. But the national interest primarily means the interests of the wealthy, the interests of investors, the interests of owners, and so on. There's never really been much of a secret about this. And it's not very surprising that people who dominate the decision-making apparatus, who can, who control the resources, who can make the decisions that affect other people, will naturally use that power to influence the government. Now, the general population can make a difference, but they've got to work on it. In fact, there are some interesting cases where popular grassroots pressure is making a difference and is putting popular attitudes into the political arena. One striking case has to do with the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Oh, right.
It's a very striking case.
The conscience free trade agreement.
Well, it's very interesting to watch the course of that. This is an agreement which is going to bring supposedly Canada, Mexico, and the United States together in a huge trading area. The major question is, the big disparity is Mexico and the United States. There's never been an effort to make a free trade bloc between.
Well, they're afraid a lot of workers from Arkansas are going to flee to Mexico to get jobs.
It's not so much that the workers from Arkansas.
No workers are allowed to really.
Which is going on anyway.
Right.
For example, General Motors is planning to close about 24 plants in North America, the United States, and Canada, but it's the biggest employer in Mexico because you can get labor at a fraction of the cost under high repression. There's no danger of unions. The union leaders can be beaten up or killed. There's very little in the way of environmental standards. So naturally, it's a way to shift work over there. Well, now the North American Free Trade Agreement, doubtless, everyone agrees, will be very good for investors. For what the effect will be on the general population, that's an open question. But it'll have a large effect. That's agreed. Now, strikingly, it's a secret agreement. It was designed to be pushed through without the general public knowing about it.
And even people, members of Congress, say they still they have a hard time when getting a copy of the thing, and then it's 8 zillion pages long, and
what happened
we need your answer tomorrow.
That's exactly what happened. The agreement was signed by the 3 presidents on August 12th, right in the middle of the electoral campaign. At that point, it was still a secret agreement. Nobody knew what was in it. It was then supposed to go to Congress on what's called a fast track, meaning Congress wouldn't bother looking at it. According to U.S. trade law, there is a major trade law, 1974 trade law, that requires citizen input into trade-related issues, primarily through the labor movement. It established something they call the Labor Advisory Committee, which is supposed to provide advice and an analysis on any trade-related legislation. That's the main citizen input. Well, you know, they were informed that their report is due in mid-September, September 9th. They were given the document, a couple of thousand pages of text, one day before to ensure that they couldn't even meet, you know. I mean, utter contempt for democracy. And in fact, to this day,
remove a lot. Past the way Bush is trying to push it through, from what I can understand, it would literally remove a lot of the constitutional authority that the Congress had.
In fact, that's part of the purpose of it, is to take away authority from democratically elected bodies that are with a state or a local or federal, and put them in and lock them into a treaty arrangement. Where decisions will be made by executive commissions, mostly of representatives of business corporations or lawyers and so on, but the public won't influence it. Well, the striking thing about this is that although it was being pushed through as virtually a secret executive agreement, and although Congress had abdicated any role, and although the business community is overwhelmingly for it, and the press is just about 100% for it, nevertheless the public has been opposed, and what's more, that public opposition took sufficient form so that it is now threatening the passage of the legislation. Right now, they probably can't pass it in its present form.
Well, what elected official who doesn't have a chance to read something that's that extensive and that far-reaching could go back to his or her constituency and say, I made an informed decision?
Well, I see the difference between this and healthcare is striking. In both this case and the healthcare case, the public has pretty well, I mean, there is a majority opinion. In the NAFTA case, that opinion has turned into activism, and it has therefore compelled the administration to respond to it. And they're trying to evade the public pressure. In fact, just the public pressure really has to do, it's not, the issue isn't should there be an agreement or shouldn't there. The issue is what kind of an agreement should there be. The current agreement, the one they're trying to ram through, protects property rights. It protects the rights of property and wealth, period. Nothing about environmental rights, nothing about workers' rights.
Safety, etc.
The public pressure is trying to put in teeth in the to enforce labor rights and environmental protection. Now, just a couple of days ago, almost in secret, the Clinton administration announced that they are not going, that there will be no teeth in the, there are several commissions that look into labor rights and environmental protection, but they said, well, these will just be advisory commissions. They won't even be able to carry out investigations, only what they call studies, and then they'll be able to give advice, but no enforcement.
Advise them that we wish someone could
if the general
investigate this.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Now, again, here's a clear case where democracy could function if the public does become organized, if the grassroots groups, which are mostly labor, environmental, religious, and other groups, if they remain active on the issue, well, they can force through those changes. Otherwise not.
And if they don't, some of those jobs that the gentleman on the top of the show is talking about are gone.
Well, they're drifting that way anyway, and they'll continue to. I mean, there's a very clear agenda here. The agenda is to protect the rights of the wealthy and to protect the rights of property. The general public what happens is the country may decline, but the U.S.-based industry and U.S.-based investment, that's doing quite well.
Right, and we were discussing before we went on the air about Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe fits right into this. I mean, let's be concrete, take General Motors, biggest corporation. They're closing 24 plants here, or trying to. They're the biggest employer in Mexico because they can get very cheap labor in a kind of high repression, low wage area. They're also opening plants in Eastern Europe. They just opened a big high-tech $700 million plant in East Germany. And the international financial press, the business press, is very frank about what it's about. I mean, they say, look, they're opening with very high expectations. There's tremendous unemployment, almost 50% unemployment. They can get wages, I'm now quoting, at 40% the cost of the pampered Western workers. Western workers are pampered as far as the business press is concerned. And there they can get them for 40% the wages and no benefits and longer hours. So that's terrific for profits. Not very good for the people in the pampered, West. Poland's even better there. They can get them for 10% of the wage level because the government's repressive enough to be able to break strikes and so on and so forth. They're opening plants in Russia for the same reason. You get educated labor, skilled labor, very low cost, healthy people. You know, they've got a pretty good health system, but very low cost. It's a new third world opening up, which undercuts Western levels. And
they
again,
literally could start stealing jobs from Mexico, I think.
Yeah, and it's very frank. I mean, capital can move. You know, you can move investments from one place to another. You can move machines.
That's what they're breaking the borders down for.
Exactly. You want to be able to move capital but keep labor fixed.
Right.
That means if you look at the country as a geographical entity, it may very well decline. If you look at the country as a place, if you define the United States as U.S.-based corporations, they're not declining. They're doing very nicely.
Right. Now, speaking of U.S.-based workers, one of the implied promises of the Clinton campaigns was to deal with the rights of laborers, labor unions. That seems to have disappeared during these first 100 days.
Yeah, that's a serious issue. 1992 was a rather striking year in that respect. This is 1992. One very striking thing happened. The Caterpillar Corporation, major corporation, brought in strike breakers to break a strike. Now that hasn't happened for 60 years in a major corporation, and it's is unknown in the industrial world. What we call here permanent replacement workers.
Right.
Scabs come in and take the jobs. And
replacement worker is a replacement word for scab. Yeah.
Now, the fact that a major corporation felt strong enough to do this is an interesting reflection of the success in breaking down the labor movement and shifting power from the general working population, which is just about everybody, to the rich and the owners. Has been going on for a long time. It accelerated during the Reagan years, when Reagan broke the PATCO strike right off. That set the thing in motion.
Once you can get rid of those people.
Yeah, you know, when Caterpillar was doing it, that really set a signal. I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a study of executives right after that, and they said about 40% of them are planning to do the same thing. Well, that's so far off the spectrum that the United States was actually condemned by the International Labor Organization, UN affiliate, which is extremely rare. They never say anything negative about one of the big, rich countries. But they said that the United States should review its labor practices. Well, the labor, when it supported Clinton, was expecting and hoping that one of the first things that they would do in the first 100 days would be to introduce legislation to put the United States back into the spectrum of, you know, industrial societies. They haven't. That's disappeared. I haven't seen anything about that.
Another thing that's disappeared is Clinton's commitment to the Haitian people. Yeah,
well, I mean, there was a whole raft of campaign promises, of which one of them was to do something about the atrocities in Haiti, where the democratic government was overthrown in a brutal coup, and it just led to tremendous persecution and tens of thousands of refugees coming. One of the first moves that he made was to rescind those promises. Not only rescind them, he actually harshened the Bush program. Instead of just turning back refugees on the open seas, they actually put a blockade around Haiti, which is radical violation of international law. You can't blockade another country. They put a blockade there to make sure that refugees don't come out.
For their own good. That was the.
For their own good, but you know, we decide what's for their good, not them. You know, they stay and get beaten and tortured and killed because we decide that's for their good. There is some talk about a diplomatic solution which will reinstitute the elected president, President Aristide, but I'll believe that one when I see it. My expectation is that some arrangement will be worked out in which Aristide will be given the formal presidency, but deprived of power. What the United States government has opposed is the fact that, and what really appalled them is that President Aristide came into power with the support of a very lively grassroots movement, La Valasse, a sort of big popular movement, which was really bringing people into actively taking part in their own affairs. And
it's so funny because he's so similar to the leaders of Kuwait. You would figure the people of this country would get behind his reinstitution as well.
Aristide?
Yeah,
I understand. Yeah. In fact, about the polar opposite.
Right. Well, in that part of the world, we talk about foreign aid a lot. People talk in terms of foreign aid. And one of the big lies is that we live in this incredibly benevolent country that's always giving all this aid to the rest of the people in the world. As a linguist and someone with a great deal of political insight, could you discuss just the use of the aid?
Well, first of all, the facts are worth knowing. Actually, there was a study done at the University of Massachusetts on public awareness of campaign issues. And one of the questions they asked people, what do you think is the biggest item on the federal budget? Well, it's military by a long shot. Very few people said that. What they picked was aid. Most people think that foreign aid is the biggest item on the federal budget. In fact, it's undetectable. The United States is one of the lowest countries among the OECD, the rich industrial countries. The United States is one of the lowest in foreign aid. And what's called foreign aid is in fact is mostly a kind of export promotion. So aid means, in fact, that's why the aid does not go primarily to the poorer, the needier countries, because they're not good consumers. If you look at the way the aid works, it's basically aid from the U.S. taxpayer to U.S. businesses, which enable the businesses to sell to the countries on money that the U.S. taxpayer gives them. It's a very small amount, I should say, but what there is turns out substantially to be export promotion, and in a realistic sense, it doesn't leave the country. It goes from one pocket into another pocket, from the pocket of taxpayers into the pockets of the exporters. Now, sometimes the population that receives it benefits, sometimes not. Often it's harmful to them because of the way it's selected. So, for example, take something like, say, food for peace. What could be more benign than that? Giving food to third world people. Well, it's not benign. I mean, when you look at it, the effects are to undercut native agriculture, to make people dependent on U.S. agribusiness exports, and to force them into agricultural exporting, which incidentally often means coca exporting. And that, in fact, it is designed for that purpose. It looks benign. It's very hardly so. You can see the way this has worked over decades. I mean, the Alliance for Progress, Kennedy's Alliance for Progress, was described as very benign in this way, and it had interesting effects. I mean, it was not surprising if you look at what they proposed, but they did succeed in Latin America in expanding exports. So the Latin American countries expanded, like take, say, beef. Beef exporting just
but there was but they got rid of the beans the people there were eating.
Yeah, not only that, but beef consumption declined. Beef consumption declined, beans and rice, local subsistence agriculture declined. The Alliance for Progress ended up being a tremendous gift for American
So we could overeat the wrong stuff sooner.
Well,
fast food restaurants.
It was terrific for U.S. exporters and for U.S. importers and for the tiny wealthy sector in Latin America, and it was a disaster for the population. And in fact, the aid program was designed for that purpose. There's an illusion here that the rich countries give aid to the poor countries. It's quite the other way around.
When in fact it's an elaborate ruse through which they actually bill people for stealing their natural resources.
Yeah, not only that, and in fact, if you look at the actual capital flows, in the last 10 years, the flow of capital from the south to the north, from the poor countries to the rich countries, is about the equivalent of 6 Marshall Plans. That's something like $500 billion. And even if you look at the U.S. and Mexico, it's probable that Mexico subsidizes the U.S. rather than conversely.
No, well, we're talking about aid. You're saying there's two major areas for aid.
Well, if you look at the very small amount of what we call aid, which is mostly not aid, the biggest chunk of it by far goes to 2 Middle East countries, Israel and Egypt, which get roughly the same amount, except remember Egypt has 10 times the population, so it means Israel gets much more per capita. And Israel per capita gets aid beyond. It's just off the chart. There's nothing like it in world affairs. Egypt gets a lot, and then Turkey is the next recipient, all Middle East countries. And then another new block of aid that's picking up now, so-called aid, is Russia and parts of Eastern Europe. The purposes of these are not the poorest areas of the world by any means.
Right.
They're not giving aid because people need it.
Right.
Eastern Europe, in fact, by third world standards, is quite well off.
Right.
It used to be part of the third world pre-1917, but it sort of pulled out of it. And in fact, what we're trying to do with the aid is return them to a third world status. We want them to be the kind of country where we can use we have access to their resources. American corporations like, say, GM and others can move production facilities there and get cheap labor as they can in Mexico. And we want them to, when we say we want them to open their markets and accept capitalist reforms, that's exactly what it means. It means turning them, returning them, because that's what they were, to a kind of third world service area. The Western countries, the rich Western countries, they don't accept these capitalist reforms. Like, we don't have them, and England doesn't have them, and Germany doesn't have them, and Japan doesn't have them, but we want the third world to have them, because then they'll be able to provide serve their role, sort of sources of raw materials, resources, and cheap labor, and so on and so forth. The aid to the Middle East is for different reasons. I mean, that's basically designed to ensure U.S. control over the oil production of the region. Israel and Egypt and Turkey are kind of regarded as sort of guardians of the wealthy. The way we run the oil system is there's a lot of potential wealth in the Middle East, and we have to make sure, as the British did before us, that wealth does not go to the people of the region, but that it comes to the West. And the way that's handled is by having family dictatorships, which run the oil production and invest their money and their profits in U.S. Treasury bonds and Kuwaiti investment firm in London and so on. And they got to be protected from their populations who don't really understand why. The population of the region, many people, is not persuaded by the logic that says the wealth of their region has to come to the West, not to, they're impoverished. So you need sort of protectors, and Israel and Turkey and Pakistan and Iran, when it was under the Shah, are kind of these protectors. We got to support them. Egypt is the biggest Arab country, and they got to be bought off to become part of the system, and that's the main reason why the aid is going there.
How about Clinton? Now we're going to go about something a little backwards here. We're going to discuss Clinton's cabinet looking more like America in a moment. But before that, how about just who he's appointed in this region?
Well, they've been interesting appointments. His chief Middle East advisor is a man named Martin Indyk, who's actually an Australian. He was given citizenship about 10 days before he was appointed, so that it would be legitimate. Indyk came to the United States, I think, about 10 years ago, and became he was appointed by AIPAC, which is the registered Israeli lobby. And he worked for the Israeli lobby. And then they decided that it would be useful to have a kind of a think tank that's not officially connected with the lobby, so it would look more independent, and it could present their point of view, but with the look of independence. So they spun off this think tank called the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which he headed, and it was basically, it wasn't a great secret. It's basically an Israeli propaganda agency, and he moved directly from that to becoming Clinton's chief advisor. The next person on the list is Samuel Lewis, who was he was a U.S. ambassador in Israel, and he was kind of a joke in Israel because he was so, he was sort of like more holy than the Pope, and when he was there, he had his hobnobbing with the right wing and so on and so forth. That's that's the main decision-making bureaucratic apparatus, and it reflects I frankly don't think it's going to have a big policy effect. Here I disagree with others, but I would expect Clinton pretty much to follow what's been.
But it's not certainly not going to improve.
It's certainly not going. I think he's going to follow the policy that the U.S. has been following for a long time, namely to try to ensure that Israel, which is the main U.S. ally, is the dominant force in the region and can be part of this system that protects, it's called what's called a strategic asset, keeps what they call stability, meaning prevent local nationalist forces from developing, and they want Egypt to participate in that. The Palestinians have no role, no rights, and they don't contribute to these strategic interests at all. They're just people. And I think that that's been the framework, and Clinton, if anything, will probably intensify it.
Mm-hmm. In your in the film that's out about you, that you said you haven't seen, but I have, which is excellent, and in release right now, and everyone should go see it. You quote John Jay, one of our beloved founding fathers, and I found the quote very telling when I thought about Clinton talking about a cabinet that looks more like America. And I think that word "looks" is very applicable because it might look more like America, but I certainly don't see any poor people in it. But what was the John Jay said?
John Jay, his favorite maxim was that the people who own the country ought to govern it. He was president of the Constitutional Convention, first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
How upset do you think he would be with the Clinton cabinet?
Oh, they're the people who own the country, all right. In fact, it's biased even more than usual towards wealthy corporate lawyers, investment bankers, people from Congress who are noted for their cozy relation to major business interests. Rubin, who's one of the chief economic advisors, comes from the largest what is now probably the largest investment firm in the country, Goldman Sachs, and the rest of them are from the same background.
The good folks at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, right. It's been claimed, I don't know exactly where, I think Time magazine claimed that it had more millionaires than the preceding
staff
cabinet.
of Time magazine, or
the journal. I didn't look at their computations, but it's plausible. They got the point, whether the details are right.
It's a daring story for Time Warner to break.
Yeah.
Speaking of that part of the world, Manhattan, we had one of the biggest events of the first 100 days. It's affected a lot of other things, is the World Trade Center bombing. How do you see that? At first I thought it was just an NBC News rehearsal that got a little bit out of hand. How do you see that? What ramifications do you think that?
Well, there is, first of all, the question. I mean, let's assume, for the sake of this discussion, that the people that they've fingered are the right people.
And if that's the case, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to blow up the World Trade Center.
Well, there's a lot of very strange things about that explosion.
That's a little too much.
For one thing, there's been some interesting discussion about this in the Israeli press, the Hebrew press in Israel, who've raised some obvious questions. I mean, the people who carried out the bombing look as if they wanted to be caught. Both the method of bombing, the trails that they left behind, coming back a couple of times to pick up
rental car,
money for $100 for a rental car. I mean, the connections abroad and so on and so forth. And they've pointed out plausibly that there's only two possible interpretations. One is that it was just an unbelievably incompetent group of people. I mean, even from the kind of bomb that they picked.
The gang that couldn't blow up straight,
It's just, so that's one possibility. It's just unimaginable incompetence. Right. The other possibility is that they were infiltrated by a very professional outfit who wanted them to expose, who had a purpose. And there are some things you can think about.
A grassy knoll.
Well, it's a group of people that would not be very hard to infiltrate.
Well, how do you think this plays out? I mean, right here in Somerville, now they're talking about which I don't think it means much that this is a quote-unquote sanctuary city, except as a gesture. It says, we're not going to harass immigrants in this town. But now they're talking about rescinding that.
Yeah.
The city council is entertaining that idea, and I think it's...
we should have, let's continue to assume that what the FBI says is correct, and I think it probably is. One of the interesting things that developed in the World Trade bombing thing was a letter that was, given front page at times, from a group that claimed to be responsible, and which some regard as authentic. I mean, no.
They used Arabic numbers in it. So.
I mean, there's some questions about it. But let's assume it to be authentic. I mean, in my opinion, it's probably authentic. But it's interesting to read it. I mean, if we paid attention to what it said, honestly, we might learn something. So, for example, the core part of their letter said that the American people should question the role of their government in carrying out or supporting terrorism throughout the world. And if the American people don't question that and do something about it, they too may be subject to terrorism. Well, you know, those are words that we should listen to, because in fact they had a point. The U.S. is one of the major terrorist states in the world.
Right.
And there are plenty of people around the world who are, who have suffered from U.S.-run terrorism and care about it. People here may not care about it, but the victims do. And they're all over the world.
And if you don't have the price of a ticket to Baghdad, you can go look at the World Trade Center.
It's not, I mean, all through the Middle East, Lebanon, for example, has been a major target of U.S., direct U.S. or else U.S.-supported terror. Central America and the Caribbean have been targeted for U.S. terror operations that go beyond anything that, you know, Libya or Iran could even dream of. There are, in fact, these people were, in fact, correct. The terrorist operations around the world can often be traced right back to Washington. In fact, the World Trade Center bombing itself is not an uninteresting example. The people who are charged with having carried it out, or their intellectual leaders, have pretty good CIA credentials. I mean, they were part of the CIA-funded operation in Afghanistan, which, I mean, I think it had an element of legitimacy. I mean, I think it makes sense to help people resisting foreign invasion. However, the people that they picked out, you know, the people that the CIA did not pick out, you know, secular nationalists to support. It picked out radical fundamentalist fanatics. One of them, particularly Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was the main, the main beneficiary of CIA support, has been just tearing the country apart. He's been shelling Kabul, you know, killing thousands of people, driving out hundreds of thousands after the political settlement. Now, these people were all associated with that group, with probably the most radical, fanatic Islamic fundamentalist group in the world, amply funded by the United States and Saudi Arabia. Well, yeah, trail happened to blow back to New York, if you can believe the FBI. But it's only one example of CIA-supported, of U.S.-supported terrorism throughout the world. Now, the press commentary on the World Trade Center bombing kept, you know, you had things like the United States. We always thought we were voyeurs in the world of terrorism. It's something out there, you know. Now we're feeling terror, senseless logic, as if we had nothing to do with it. We have a lot to do with it, and we should be honest enough to face that.
And as if that one instance is the first time there's been any violence in this society. I mean, do people really?
I mean, it's true that usually we export our violence. So most of our violence is elsewhere. I mean, it's a very violent society internally, of course. I mean, it's an unbelievably violent society internally, but government-supported violence is, of course, external. You know, I mean, here, fortunately, the government doesn't carry out extensive violence against its own population. We carry out our violence against other populations.
Although, you know what I saw in the news this evening? I saw Marines practicing taking urban locations at Camp Pendleton. Then they were putting this on television just to show people that they're ready for the
It's happened. I mean, the U.S. is not free of state violence. So, for example, if you look at U.S. labor history, it's unusually violent. Hundreds of workers were killed in labor actions here at a time when nobody was being killed in Europe. But still, it's true that overwhelmingly government-initiated violence is against populations elsewhere, populations in the third world, including large-scale terror operations. And people here may not know about it, but people elsewhere in the world know very well about it. They're the targets.
It's no secret. Like the secret bombing of Cambodia. That's pretty big news over there.
It's not news to the hundreds of thousands of peasants who are killed.
You can hear those when they go off.
If we were to pay attention to the contents of this letter, authentic or not, we could learn something from it, if we're honest about it.
We have a phone call, Dr. Chomsky. Let me see if I can figure this out. No, we don't. Okay. They gave up.
They gave up. Or did you cut it off?
Are these the numbers, 628-8829 or 628-8826?
8826.
Oh, 628-8826. I didn't give away the secret lucky control room number or anything.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to call, they can.
And not be cut off, maybe.
They weren't. Yeah, I don't know. I think they had given up.
Oh, had they? Okay.
Maybe this is them. Is that it? Are they here? Okay, fine. Well, there seems to be some flashing now. What do you think about the cabinet in general, the cabinet appointments? How about the whole attorney general fiasco?
Yeah, that was I mean, he made political errors, but there was something pretty cynical about that. I mean, whatever you think about Zoe Baird, I mean, if those...
Attorney General Electric.
I mean, if those conditions, I mean, yes, starting with who she was.
It's who she worked for that I cared about.
Yeah,
it wasn't, she didn't do anything immoral. She only exploited immigrants. She wasn't, she wasn't...
But, you know, the kind of infraction that she was picked up on, I mean, not many people would remain in government if you count. On the other hand, her own, you know, neither her background is not very pretty, nor the current Attorney General.
Well, she sent a lot of people to the electric chair, hasn't she? Here, let me just try this again. Hello?
Hello, how do you do?
Good, how are you tonight? Who's calling?
My name is Logan Evans. I have a geopolitical theory which calls for a global U.S. system, the world divided into states in which everybody would have a vote within the U.S. system, a global democracy. I'm just wondering what Mr. Chomsky thinks about that, whether he thinks the U.S. system could be a global system in which everybody could vote for a global president in Congress.
Well, I'd like to start with something simpler, turning the U.S. system into a U.S. democracy, which it's very far from. I mean, we do have the right to push, to push levers every couple of years. But the question is whether the population actually can play a meaningful role in managing its own affairs, and I don't think it does. All that we've been talking about illustrates that. For example, popular attitudes are very different from the spectrum of government policies. The population is expected to simply be observers. They are what are called ignorant and meddlesome outsiders in the way the theories are designed. So we could start by trying to create a meaningful democracy here before we start exporting what we have.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling. We have another call. Let's see if I can do this twice in a row. Hello, you're on Dead Air Live.
Hello.
Who's calling?
This is Justin. I have a question for Dr. Chomsky, I believe.
Okay, speak up.
My question is that do you think that there's a possibility that President Aristide might or will go back as the president of Haiti?
Well, I certainly hope that he'll go back, but if you want my speculation, it's of course a speculation. My speculation is that the arrangement that is now being crafted will have him be the official president, whether he stays here or goes back under protection, but with a prime minister who will have effective power and who will represent the interests of traditional elites and the U.S. businesses who run assembly plants there and own the plantations and so on. I hope that doesn't happen, but I think that that's what is going to happen. What the U.S. so far, at least, has strongly opposed is the popular grassroots movement, which swept him into power with 2/3 of the vote. That U.S. businessmen and the Haitian elites don't like at all. So what I'd anticipate is a formal arrangement in which he'll be a kind of a figurehead president. And unless we do something here to stop that, I think that's what's likely to come.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Possibly the one thing on the upside with the first 100 days of the Clinton presidency, some reasonable signs you were discussing before with social policy.
By and large, the Republicans and the Democrats have the same general policies. They're just factions of it. They're kind of a business party, and they're just two factions of it. So their prime commitment on major issues is to the welfare of the rich, investors, owners, and managers, and so on. And they don't differ much in that respect. But they do differ in the kind of popular constituency that they appeal to. So the Republicans are somewhat more openly the business party. They don't pretend to be anything else. As a result, they don't have traditionally they have not had an easy appeal to the majority of the population. I mean, you can't go to the majority of the population and say, you know, hey guys, we want to enrich the rich, as the Reaganites did for the last 10 years. One of the reasons why Reagan is the most unpopular living president next to Nixon. He and Nixon are sort of tied for last place.
Oh, really? I haven't seen
that's been kept kind of
like
quiet.
Yeah.
In fact, you'd be surprised. You know who the most popular ex-president?
Probably Carter.
Carter, by a long shot. Ford is second. And
He's our very best ex-president.
Yeah, Ford people vote for because they don't
wasn't
remember
too good
who he
on
was.
East Timor,
They don't
though.
remember him. You know, they don't know who he was. They figure he can't have been too bad. But Nixon and Reagan bring up the rear. In any event,
Well, they should.
yeah, but you can't go to the public and try to garner votes that way. So the way that the Republicans tend to develop mass appeal is by appealing to racism or jingoism or religious fundamentalism
Right.
or something like that.
Paranoia.
And they get, you can get pretty big groups that way in a troubled society. The Democrats, on the other hand, claim to be the popular party. Their policies aren't all that different when they get in, but they do appeal to different constituencies. They try to organize, mobilize to vote, not to act. Labor, working people, women, ethnic minorities, the elderly, and so on. Now, when the parties get into power, on issues that are of crucial interest to the business community, they don't really differ very much, say NAFTA. On the other hand, on issues that are not of great significance to the business community, say civil rights, they do differ. There they sort of throw crumbs to their constituency. So a Republican administration, as we saw in the last 10 years, is going to be very harsh with regard to things like civil rights. In fact, it's going to be repressive. It's going to introduce censorship, to introduce harsh punishments, to make it difficult, even impossible, sometimes to bring civil rights issues to the courts. It'll restrict the right of free choice for women about abortion. I mean, things like that are the kinds of things you'd expect it to do, given its popular constituency. The Democrats, with their popular constituency, will not do that. So I'd expect, and we already see, an improvement in the civil rights climate, but more protection for human rights and civil rights, for people's freedom of choice, for family leave, for example. Business doesn't care much one way or another, but working people do care.
Right.
That kind of thing happened, and that's the kind of, in these domains, the parties do carry out different policies. Now those differences are very important for human life. I don't mean to play them down. On the other hand, they don't matter much to people, to the people who own the country and therefore govern it.
Right.
So therefore they can change.
Right.
And in the area of social policy, I would expect changes of a kind that at least I would regard as an improvement.
Some improvement. We have I've often said there's a nickel's worth of difference between Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah.
And if I took the nickel and put it on the table, a Democrat would steal it from me, and a Republican would kill me for it. Okay, let's see. Hi, you're on Dead Air Live. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Leonard Diggins calling.
Hi.
And I'm in Somerville now. And if I could talk on or ask about two issues, I'd like to, but if not, I understand.
Go ahead.
And I'll deal with.
Let's see if we get to it.
Okay. The first one is based on a comment that Noam made about we not having a democracy now and making decisions more open to the public. I am curious as to how he would imagine getting from where we are now to there without making the situation a lot worse than it perhaps is. And let me just add that I'm hard-pressed to think that most people would be capable of making the technical decisions that often go into a lot of legislation. I certainly don't, and I spend a lot of time following the news. So that's the first issue.
Okay, let's start with that.
Well, let's take the. I don't think it's a very difficult problem. First of all, I don't share your skepticism about people's ability to think through problems and make decisions about things that matter to them. I mean, it's true they have to have access to information, and they have to have interaction with one another, and they have to have opportunities to discuss and so on, but that's what organizations are about. And I don't know of any reason to believe that the people who do make the decision are any more qualified. They just have different interests. They make the decisions with different interests in mind. Now, how can these things happen? Well, take the two examples that we began to discuss, at the beginning of the program. Take, say, healthcare and NAFTA. Take those two issues. On both of those issues, the general public has opinions which happen to be different from the spectrum of the spectrum of policy choices. On the healthcare issue, the public has not been organized and has not acted in any way to try to realize what they want. So therefore, they're not going to get it. On the case of NAFTA, there happens to be a network of groups, environmental groups, labor groups, religious-based groups, and others, which have functioned to try to articulate a point of view, to develop and articulate a point of view based on grassroots participation, and to put it into the public arena by pressure, and they're getting somewhere. Well, that's the way democracy works. That's the way every social change that's been worthwhile has come about. These things are not given as gifts by experts or benevolent autocrats. They're struggled for and fought for. And that's how labor got the right to organize in the first place in the mid-1930s.
I understand. And even in those cases, though, usually the decisions come about through representation. I mean, I'm a member of a union myself, and often we elect representatives who make decisions. The membership get to talk to our representatives, but in the end, especially when it's a close call, I mean, there's someone who then represents you to the board, and so I see in almost any case we'll have to end up with a representative form of government, and
but if they don't represent you well, get a new representative.
The issue I don't think is any form of governance is going to be representative. I mean, you're not going to get 200 million people sitting in a room and making a decision, so there'll be representation. The question is who controls.
I hear you.
Like in your union, the question is, do you determine the decisions, and does your representative do what you say? Or does your representative do what he or she wants, and you just sort of read about it in the papers?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I got two questions on the same subject. I think I'll turn the phone over to someone else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Looks like the phones are cool. Let's see what we haven't covered here. I sort of got thrust into this evening. I know what I wanted to promote something. On September 28th, I'll be doing a benefit at Johnny D's for the a sister city program in El Salvador, raising money. And you know what? That brings up an interesting,
What's happening in El Salvador is important.
Yeah, amnesty.
And worth paying attention. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very telling.
It's extremely important. I mean, there was a peace treaty which stopped the fighting. A crucial part of the peace treaty was establishing what was called a truth commission, United Nations-run truth commission, which would investigate a small sample of the atrocities conducted in the last decade. And they did conduct a rather detailed inquiry into a number of the atrocities and discovered something which will come as absolutely no surprise to people who've been following the story outside the mainstream.
Right.
Namely that they attributed 85% of the atrocities to the security forces,
right.
Another 10% to the paramilitary forces, the death squads, which are associated with the government and the big business interests. So that means 95% were attributed to the people we supported.
Right.
We trained, armed, directed, and supported. And 5% were attributed to the guerrillas. Well, another part of the peace treaty was that people who are implicated in crimes must be punished for them.
Right.
The first thing that the government did was to pass an amnesty, which exonerated almost all people, not only those who had committed crimes, but those who are implicated through the Truth Commission or later investigations. So that eliminated the threat of punishment, thereby undermining the peace treaty. But it's interesting what they excluded. Not everybody was under the amnesty. I mean, it turned out that there's a group of people who they call internationally protected persons. Well, that means American military who are there advising the killers. If somebody shot at them, that's not, if you killed American church women, that's okay.
Right.
But if you shot at an American Marine, that's not okay.
Right.
That's an interesting decision. I mean, that would be scandalous by international standards.
Oh, well, of course, I mean, and it is. And it is
Well, the question
scandalous.
is, do we care about it?
That's
Are we
right.
going to act
It was very
to
interesting.
make sure that
60 Minutes did a piece that really prompted up the xenophobic fear of people entering our country at the beginning, and then the last piece, and then in between they had some fluff piece, and the last piece was about Salvador. And if you watched it in the opposite order, you would know why people would flee countries to come here.
Yeah.
A lot of these foreigners that we're so afraid of are in fact fleeing U.S. foreign policy, and ironically, this is the safe haven.
There are tens of thousands of people who were slaughtered there in U.S. armed and directed terror. There was an interesting comment about this by one of the last major
30 seconds.
Crimes was the killing of the Jesuits. The person who replaced the rector of the university, pointed out that there's somebody missing in this whole scenario, namely the U.S. government. That's our responsibility.
And you keep an eye on all our responsibilities and inform those of us that try to be responsible. And it's a pleasure and an honor to appear with you on Dead Air Live tonight. Dr. Chomsky, we'll see you around the campus.
Good to see you.